Meghan Mackle has just been arrested by Princess Anne after she violated royal protocols and returned to Birmingham Palace after being kicked out for life. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. The story of Meghan Markle's life within the royal family was never meant to be simple. From the very beginning, her path had been strewn with challenges few could anticipate. She had entered the world of royalty not as a princess born into lineage or privilege, but as an outsider, a woman from California whose career as an actress had been far removed from the rigid expectations of the British monarchy. In the eyes of the world, her wedding to Prince Harry had been a fairy tale. The fairy tale dress, the historic ceremony, the smiling faces of the crowds that stretched for miles. Yet behind the smiles, behind the perfectly curated photographs, there were tensions that few had truly seen, undercurrents that hinted at a growing divide between Meghan and the institution she had married into. At first, her charm and determination seemed to bridge the gap. Meghan was smart, articulate, and determined to carve her own place within a centuries-old system. She embraced royal duties with energy, attending events, visiting charities, and learning the subtle, intricate codes of behavior required of someone in her position. She was lauded for her compassion, her public speeches, and the way she connected with people outside the palace walls. Yet even as she worked tirelessly to integrate, there were whispers behind the scenes. Courtiers, long accustomed to rigid protocol and unquestioned tradition, watched her closely. To some, she was refreshingly independent. To others, she was unpredictable, a challenge to the established order. The turning point came gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. Public scrutiny intensified with every action Meghan took. Every trip, every outfit, every public statement was analyzed to the smallest detail. Headlines alternated between praise and criticism, oscillating like a pendulum between admiration for her modernity and skepticism about her commitment to tradition. And as the pressure mounted, so did the conflicts behind palace walls. Small disagreements over protocol, personal choices, and public statements began to compound, forming fissures that neither Meghan nor the royal family could ignore. The cracks were subtle at first, almost invisible, but they grew wider with every passing day. Eventually, the tension reached a breaking point. Meghan, once celebrated for her individuality, became increasingly isolated. Certain members of the family expressed frustration with her public behavior, her choices, and the perceived challenges she posed to the centuries of tradition that defined the monarchy. Decisions that might have been trivial in another context, a charity event handled differently, an interview conducted without approval, a social media post deemed too personal, were magnified under the glare of public attention and royal expectation. It was a delicate world where a misstep could have serious consequences, and Meghan's presence was now viewed through a lens sharpened by suspicion and caution. The palace, for centuries, had maintained its authority not only through tradition but through a careful balance of visibility and control. Royals were expected to navigate public life while adhering to strict codes of conduct. Meghan, brilliant and determined though she was, had not fully adapted to this invisible yet omnipresent set of rules. Her individuality, which the public had once celebrated, now seemed to some a threat. Her refusal to remain silent, her insistence on shaping her own narrative, and her modern approach to life in the palace clashed with centuries of rigid hierarchy. What had begun as admiration for her presence now edged toward discomfort, and in some cases, open disapproval. The decision to expel Meghan from Birmingham Palace was not made lightly. It was a culmination of months, perhaps even years, of observation, negotiation, and conflict. The palace weighed public perception, family cohesion, and the potential fallout of such an unprecedented action. To ban someone for life was extraordinary, a move almost unheard of in modern times. Yet the palace believed that the integrity of the institution depended on this decisive action. Meghan, once an emblem of hope and modernity, was now a figure of controversy, her every action scrutinized and politicized. The message was clear. Rules existed not to be negotiated, but to be followed. For Meghan, the expulsion was devastating. She had arrived at the palace with dreams of belonging, with hopes of forging a life that blended personal freedom with royal duty. She had committed herself to the family, to its work, and to its public image, yet she found herself suddenly ostracized. The emotional impact was profound. Beyond the public scrutiny, beyond the headlines, was a sense of personal loss, loss of home, of community, of identity within a system she had once believed she could navigate successfully. The palace gates that had once welcomed her as a bride were now closed, the corridors she had walked as part of the family now forbidden. The symbolic and literal separation was absolute. Public reaction to her fall from grace was as dramatic as the expulsion itself. Media outlets spun the story into a spectacle, combining intrigue, analysis, and speculation. Headlines proclaimed betrayal, scandal, and even tragedy. Social media became a battlefield of opinion, with some praising the palace for upholding tradition, while others condemned it for rejecting a woman who had dared to assert herself. The global audience, already deeply invested in the life of Meghan Markle, was riveted. The story resonated because it touched on universal themes: the clash between personal autonomy and institutional expectation, the pain of exclusion, and the complexity of human relationships bound by duty and history. Yet even as Meghan left the palace, her story was far from over. The fall from grace, while intensely personal, had set the stage for a drama that would continue to unfold in unpredictable ways. Her expulsion was not merely a severing of ties, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one in which she would navigate life outside the walls she had once called home. It was a chapter defined by resilience, by reflection, and by the potential for both reconciliation and further conflict. The consequences of her actions, and those of the palace, would ripple far beyond the immediate moment, shaping public perception, family dynamics, and her own path in ways that no one could have fully anticipated. In retrospect, the fall from grace was both inevitable and tragic. Meghan's journey had always been complex, shaped by public adoration and criticism, by personal ambition and institutional constraints. Her expulsion represented a convergence of factors: personality clashes, protocol violations, media pressure, and the inescapable weight of history. The human elements, fear, pride, disappointment, and longing, interwove with institutional imperatives, creating a moment of intense emotional resonance. For Meghan, it was a personal catastrophe; for the royal family, it was a test of authority; for the public, it was a story that blurred the lines between personal drama and institutional responsibility. And yet, even in the aftermath, hints of defiance lingered. Meghan, though expelled, was not defeated. Her intellect, charisma, and determination suggested that her story was far from over. The very act of leaving, of being forced out, became a paradoxical assertion of her enduring presence in public consciousness. The world would not forget her, and the palace itself would soon face the challenge of containing a narrative that refused to be silenced. The fall from grace, while dramatic and painful, was also a prelude to a series of events that would test the limits of royal authority, personal courage, and public fascination in ways that were only beginning to emerge. Once Meghan Markle had been expelled from Birmingham Palace, the ripple effects were immediate, far-reaching, and relentless. No palace corridor could remain untouched by speculation, no media outlet could resist reporting on every nuance of her departure, and no social circle connected to royalty could remain silent. What had been a private dispute behind gilded doors now exploded into a global conversation. Every detail, every gesture, every statement was examined, dissected, and amplified. The whispers that had once been contained within the palace walls were now carried by millions around the world, amplified by the digital age, turning what might have been a personal and family matter into a public spectacle of unprecedented scale. From the moment news of her expulsion leaked, reporters, commentators, and social media users raced to interpret what had happened. Headlines varied from sympathetic to scathing, often within hours of one another. Some labeled Meghan a victim of an archaic system that stifled individuality and punished independence. Others painted her as reckless, someone who had knowingly challenged centuries of royal protocol and paid the inevitable price. Every outlet, regardless of perspective, contributed to the atmosphere of hysteria and fascination. The story became a lens through which broader societal debates could be examined: gender, power, race, and the clash between tradition and modernity. Within the palace, the whispers were just as potent, though of a very different nature. Staff members who had served the royal family for decades found themselves caught between loyalty and curiosity. Courtiers spoke in hushed tones, aware that even casual remarks could make their way into public knowledge. Security personnel discussed the unprecedented nature of Meghan's behavior, wondering if there was a possibility of further disruptions. Every staff member, from the most senior aide to the newest footman, felt the tension in the air. The palace, a symbol of stability and timeless authority, seemed suddenly fragile, its order threatened not by external forces but by the presence of one woman whose actions challenged its very foundations. Rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by both fact and speculation. Some claimed that Meghan had planned her departure for months, quietly undermining palace authority and plotting a return that would shock the family. Others insisted that her actions were impulsive, driven by emotion and a desperate need for connection after being ostracized. Tabloids suggested that private letters had been exchanged between Meghan and sympathetic courtiers, offering secret insight into her motivations. Each rumor added a layer of intrigue, turning the narrative into a sprawling mosaic of possible truths and half-truths, leaving the public, the staff, and the royal family questioning what was real and what was imagined. The media frenzy was relentless. Television news programs dedicated segments to analyzing the incident, dissecting Meghan's every move, and speculating on the palace's response. Social media was ablaze with reactions, hashtags trending in minutes, threads analyzing every photograph, meme, and video. Public opinion was sharply divided. Fans of Meghan celebrated her courage, calling her a modern icon challenging outdated structures. Critics accused her of selfishness, recklessness, and a disregard for the sanctity of the monarchy. The polarized responses reflected deeper cultural debates about freedom, authority, and the role of public figures in society. What had begun as a palace dispute had transformed into a worldwide conversation about values, power, and identity. Among the palace staff, whispers were often tinged with fear and speculation. Some wondered if Meghan's actions would embolden others to challenge royal authority, potentially creating chaos in an institution built on hierarchical obedience. Others debated whether her defiance was a symptom of personal pain, a human response to isolation, disappointment, and the pressures of constant scrutiny. These discussions were not merely idle chatter, they were part of the palace's collective effort to understand, anticipate, and respond to a situation that defied precedent. Every whisper carried weight because every whisper was a potential clue to navigating a crisis that had suddenly become public, complicated, and emotionally charged. Rumors also spread beyond the walls of the palace. Friends of the royal family, public figures, and former staff members offered commentary to journalists, often with the caveat that their accounts were unofficial. Some suggested that Meghan had grown increasingly frustrated with the rigid hierarchy, the expectations, and the relentless intrusion of the press into every aspect of her life. Others speculated that her estrangement was fueled by misunderstandings, miscommunications, and long-standing tensions exacerbated by cultural differences. Every account, every whisper, added texture to a story that was both intensely human and politically charged, forcing the public to grapple with layers of context, motive, and consequence. Even royal watchers and historians could not resist joining the conversation. Experts analyzed Meghan's behavior in light of past royal conflicts, drawing comparisons to previous instances of defiance and scandal within the monarchy. They highlighted patterns: the clash of personal autonomy with institutional expectation, the consequences of public perception, and the role of media in shaping narratives. These insights, while grounded in historical precedent, also underscored the uniqueness of Meghan's situation. Her experience was unprecedented, both in its public impact and in the way it exposed the delicate balance between personal freedom and royal obligation. The whispers and rumors also had a psychological impact on those involved. Meghan, already isolated by her expulsion, was now subject to global scrutiny. Every action she took outside the palace was analyzed through the lens of the ongoing scandal. She faced the dual pressures of defending her choices and navigating a world that alternately celebrated and vilified her. Within the palace, Princess Anne and other family members grappled with the emotional consequences of the expulsion. The whispers were not simply about facts, they were about perception, trust, and the erosion of confidence in an institution that relied on discretion and order. Each conversation, each rumor, threatened to destabilize relationships and challenge authority. Amid this storm, a few constants remained. The monarchy's emphasis on protocol, discipline, and tradition continued to guide responses. Princess Anne's reputation for unyielding adherence to rules gave structure to the chaos. Courtiers and staff, despite fear or curiosity, upheld their duties with diligence. And Meghan, despite isolation and criticism, demonstrated resilience and awareness, navigating the complex interplay of personal and public pressures. The rumors and whispers, while disruptive, also highlighted the human dimension of this unfolding drama, the fears, loyalties, misunderstandings, and ambitions that shaped every decision and every reaction. Ultimately, the period of rumors and whispers set the stage for a story that was far from resolved. It revealed the fragility of public perception, the complexity of human relationships within high-stakes institutions, and the intensity of emotional pressures when private conflicts become global news. The whispers were more than gossip, they were a reflection of tension, curiosity, and anticipation. They represented the world's fascination with Meghan, with the monarchy, and with the collision between tradition and modernity. Each whisper hinted at truths, half-truths, and consequences that would unfold in dramatic ways in the chapters to come. As the story moved forward, it became clear that the whispers were merely the beginning. They framed the narrative, shaped expectations, and heightened suspense. They reminded everyone, inside the palace, outside it, and across the world, that the return of Meghan Markle was not a simple event. It was a cultural, emotional, and historical phenomenon, one that would test loyalty, authority, and the very fabric of the monarchy itself. The rumors may have started as whispers, but they were the drumbeat heralding a confrontation that would be as compelling as it was unprecedented. The story of Meghan Markle's life within the royal orbit had already captivated the world, but nothing could have prepared anyone for what was about to happen next. The whispers, the speculation, the media frenzy, all of it paled in comparison to the act that would redefine her relationship with the monarchy, her return to Birmingham Palace. After being expelled for life, Meghan's decision to return was nothing short of audacious. It was a move that defied convention, shattered precedent, and instantly became a global talking point. The very idea of her walking through those hallowed halls again seemed impossible, yet she had chosen to do so, and the consequences would reverberate far beyond her personal life. The motivations behind her return were layered, complex, and deeply human. Meghan had been a public figure for years, accustomed to scrutiny and controversy, yet the exile from the palace was a personal blow unlike any she had experienced. For someone who had once called the royal family home, the expulsion represented more than physical separation, it was a severing of identity, a denial of belonging, and a challenge to the life she had hoped to build. Her return, then, was not simply an act of rebellion, it was a deeply personal quest to reclaim agency in a situation where she had been rendered powerless. It was a statement that she would not be silenced, ignored, or erased, regardless of the risks involved. The logistics of her return were as daring as the decision itself. Entering a palace where she was officially unwelcome required careful planning, a keen awareness of the potential consequences, and the courage to face confrontation head-on. Every step she took carried symbolic weight. The gates, once closed to her, now stood as a threshold between exile and audacity, between public curiosity and private reckoning. Security protocols, staff procedures, and palace norms had all been meticulously designed to prevent unauthorized access. Yet Meghan, undeterred, had found a way to navigate the system. Each movement was a carefully considered statement. She was returning not as a visitor, not as a supplicant, but as someone who demanded acknowledgement, who insisted on having her story heard from within the very walls that had once welcomed her as a bride. The tension surrounding her return was immediate. Courtiers and staff, accustomed to the predictable rhythms of palace life, found themselves in unprecedented territory. Whispers turned into urgent conversations. Guards, trained to anticipate disruption, suddenly faced a scenario that no protocol manual could fully address. Every interaction became a potential flashpoint, every glance a source of speculation. The palace, a symbol of stability and centuries of tradition, now felt fragile, its authority tested by the presence of a single individual who had been deemed untouchable in her absence. Meghan's return was not merely a personal act, it was a seismic event, shaking the foundations of the institution itself. The emotional stakes for Meghan were equally high. Walking through those halls brought back a flood of memories, the excitement of her early days in the family, the pressures of public life, the moments of triumph and joy, as well as the conflicts and misunderstandings that had ultimately led to her expulsion. Each step was a confrontation with the past, a test of resilience, and a declaration of her ongoing presence in a space that had once rejected her. The psychological complexity of the act cannot be overstated. Returning was an assertion of strength, yet it also exposed her to immense vulnerability. Every action she took could be scrutinized, judged, or weaponized, yet she moved forward regardless, determined to reclaim her narrative. Meanwhile, the palace itself became a theater of anticipation. Princess Anne, known for her strict adherence to protocol and her unwavering sense of duty, was immediately aware of Meghan's presence. The formidable royal, who had weathered decades of scrutiny, conflict, and responsibility, now faced an unprecedented challenge. Anne's position was clear: the palace rules must be upheld, and no individual could be allowed to flout the authority of centuries without consequence. Yet the situation was fraught with complexity. Confronting Meghan meant navigating a delicate interplay of personal emotion, public perception, and institutional authority. Every decision, every word, carried weight, and the stakes could not have been higher. Outside the palace, the world waited with bated breath. News of Meghan's return spread like wildfire, igniting global speculation. Headlines appeared in minutes: Meghan Markle returns to Birmingham Palace in defiance of royal protocol. Experts analyzed the implications, historians contextualized it within centuries of royal precedent, and the public debated the morality and audacity of her actions. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from admiration to outrage, with hashtags trending in multiple countries. Public fascination reached a fever pitch, not simply because of the scandal, but because the act embodied a tension that resonated universally: the clash between authority and personal agency, tradition and individual will, exile and return. The decision to return was not a spontaneous act, it carried with it strategic considerations. Meghan knew the stakes. She understood the global attention her presence would command. She was aware that her every movement would be recorded, analyzed, and interpreted. Yet her determination to act suggested that this was not about publicity alone, it was about asserting control over a narrative that had long been shaped by forces outside her influence. The act of returning was, in many ways, a reclamation of self. It demonstrated that even in the face of exclusion, even in the shadow of scandal, she retained the power to challenge, to provoke, and to demand recognition. Inside the palace, the atmosphere shifted as Meghan's presence became known. Staff who had once been accustomed to predictability now navigated heightened tension and uncertainty. Courtiers exchanged urgent messages, and security personnel prepared for potential confrontation. The palace, long a symbol of hierarchical certainty, was now a stage of suspense. Every corridor, every doorway, and every room became charged with the anticipation of what would unfold. Meghan's steps echoed not only through marble halls but through the expectations and assumptions of every person who had